Jacob's story is an epic journey of faith, deception, and redemption that echoes through the ages. In a world where cunning often triumphs over integrity, the life of this patriarch confronts us with uncomfortable truths about human nature and the divine plan. Have you ever wondered how God can use imperfect people to fulfill His purposes? Get ready for a narrative that will challenge your notions of justice and mercy as we explore the surprising origin of a chosen nation. Before we begin this journey, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to ensure you do not miss any of our future biblical stories. Now, let us uncover the history of the man who wrestled with God. The wind that swept across the arid lands of the Negev was ancient and carried with it the whispers of promises made long ago. It was a dry wind, one that cracked the lips and tested the spirit, yet it was the breath of the land that God had sworn to give to the descendants of Abraham. However, in the camp of Isaac, the son of the promise, the wind carried only silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that had settled over the tents for 20 long years. Isaac was no longer the young boy who had walked up the mountain with his father, willing to be the sacrifice. He was now a man of 60 years, carrying the weight of a divine legacy on his shoulders. He was the miracle child, the one born to Sarah when she was well past the age of childbearing. His very existence was proof that the impossible could happen. Yet, as he looked at his beloved wife Rebekah, his heart ached with a profound and quiet sorrow. Rebekah was beautiful, with eyes that held the depth of the wells her husband dug in the wilderness. But those eyes were often cast down in private grief. For 2 decades they had prayed. For 2 decades they had waited. The promise of becoming a great nation, as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, seemed to be dying within the confines of her barren womb. In a culture where a woman's worth was measured by the sons she bore, Rebekah felt the stinging gaze of the world. She was the vessel of the promise, yet the vessel remained empty. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burnt orange. Isaac walked away from the camp, seeking the solitude of the open field. He needed to speak to the God of his father. He needed to understand why the blessing seemed to halt with him. He found a jagged rock, worn smooth by the elements, and knelt in the dust. "Lord of my father Abraham," Isaac whispered, his voice cracking with emotion, "you promised that through my line the nations of the earth would be blessed. You opened the womb of my mother Sarah when all hope was lost. I plead with you now for my wife. Rebekah is sorrowful in spirit. Her tent is silent. If I am the son of the promise, let the promise continue. Do not let this hope end in the dust." He prayed not with the entitlement of a prince, but with the desperation of a husband who loved his wife. He poured out his soul until the stars appeared, the very stars that mocked him with their vast numbers. And the Lord heard him. It did not happen with thunder or lightning, but in the quiet answering of nature. In time, the sickness came upon Rebekah, not the sickness of death, but the nausea of new life. The camp erupted in cautious joy. The servants whispered, and Isaac walked with a lighter step. The miracle had happened again. The God of Abraham was faithful. However, the joy was soon shadowed by a strange and terrifying reality. As the months passed, Rebekah did not feel the gentle fluttering of a child within her. Instead, she felt a battle. It was as if a war was being waged inside her body. The movements were violent, jarring, and constant. She could hardly sleep, and when she did, she was awakened by the sensation of struggle, as if 2 armies were clashing within the darkness of her womb. The pain was intense, physical, and spiritual. Rebekah, exhausted and frightened, wondered if this blessing was actually a curse. If this is the gift of God, she thought, why does it feel like I am being torn apart? Unable to bear the uncertainty, she went to inquire of the Lord. She sought a place of solitude, away from the prying eyes of her servants. She needed to know why her body was in such turmoil. The answer she received was cryptic, poetic, and terrifying. The voice of the divine spoke to her spirit, clear and unyielding. "2 nations are in your womb," the voice declared. "2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." Rebekah placed a hand over her swollen stomach, her breath catching in her throat. It was not just a child, it was 2 twins. And they were not merely brothers. They were the seeds of two opposing nations, two distinct destinies that were already fighting for dominance before they had even breathed the air of the world. But the final part of the prophecy chilled her the most. The older will serve the younger. In their world, the firstborn was king. The firstborn received the double portion, the authority, and the leadership of the clan. To say the older would serve the younger was to overturn the very foundations of their society. It was a reversal of order, a disruption of nature. Rebekah returned to her tent, the weight of the prophecy settling in her heart. She looked at Isaac, who sat by the fire, his face lined with age and hope. She kept the words of the Lord close to her chest, pondering them. She knew now that the struggle inside her was only the beginning. The war between her sons would not end at birth. It was a conflict written into their very souls by the hand of God. The time for the delivery arrived with the heat of the midday Sunday. The tent of Rebekah became a place of intense labor and hushed anxiety. The struggle that had plagued her pregnancy culminated in the agony of birth. Outside, Isaac paced back and forth, his hands clasped together, muttering prayers for safety. The first cry that pierced the air was loud and demanding. It was a cry of strength, a raw sound that seemed to command attention. The midwives gasped as they received the child. He was unlike any infant they had ever seen. He was not soft and pale like a newborn. He was red, his skin flushed with a ruddy hue that spoke of earth and blood, and he was covered in hair. A fine red mantle of hair covered his small body like a garment. They named him Esau, which meant hairy, but in the hearts of those who saw him, he was the definition of the wild. He looked fully formed, ready for the harshness of the world from his very first breath. Isaac, hearing the news, felt a surge of pride. A strong son, a survivor, a firstborn worthy of the rugged land. But the birth was not finished. Moments later, another child emerged. He was the opposite of his brother in every way. His skin was smooth and fair, vulnerable and soft. He did not burst forth with a roar, but came into the world with a grip of iron. As he was born, his small hand was firmly clamped around the heel of his brother Esau. It was a sight that caused the midwives to whisper in awe and unease. The second-born was literally holding back the first, as if he had been trying to pull him back, trying to overtake him even in the threshold of life. He was dragging on the heel of the one who went before him. They named him Jacob. The name meant he grasps the heel, or figuratively, the supplanter, the one who trips up another to take their place. It was a name that carried a shadow, a prediction of a nature that would be defined by striving and ambition. As the boys grew, the differences that had been evident at birth became the defining chasms of their lives. They were twins, born of the same womb at the same time, yet they were as different as the sun and the moon, as the desert and the garden. Esau was a man of the open country. He belonged to the wild. He grew tall and broad, his red hair flowing in the wind as he ran through the fields. He had no patience for the quiet life of the tents or the complex traditions of his grandfather Abraham. He lived for the hunt. He loved the adrenaline of the chase, the smell of the earth, and the satisfaction of bringing down a stag with his bow. He was a creature of instinct and appetite. When he was hungry, he ate. When he was tired, he slept. He did not ponder the future. He consumed the present. Isaac loved Esau. As the old patriarch's eyes grew dimmer, he found joy in the vitality of his older son. He loved the taste of the wild game Esau brought home. It was a connection to the physical world that Isaac, in his old age and quiet demeanor, lacked. Esau was the strength Isaac wished he possessed. When Esau entered the tent, he brought the scent of the field, the smell of vitality and action, and Isaac would smile, feeling that the legacy was safe in such strong hands. Jacob was different. He was a quiet man, content to stay among the tents. While Esau was out conquering the wilderness, Jacob was watching, listening, and learning. He sat by the fires, listening to the stories of Abraham, absorbing the history of the covenant, and understanding the value of the birthright. He was smooth-skinned and soft-spoken, but his mind was as sharp as flint. He saw things his brother missed. He understood that the true power of their family lay not in the strength of the bow, but in the favor of God. Rebekah loved Jacob. She saw in him the depth that was missing in Esau. She watched Esau treat his heritage with casual indifference, more interested in filling his belly than filling his soul. But in Jacob, She saw a hunger for something greater, and she remembered the voice of the Lord from years ago, "The older will serve the younger." She saw Jacob's hand grasping the heel of destiny, and she aligned her heart with him. The camp became divided not by visible walls but by the invisible currents of favoritism. Isaac and Esau, bound by the love of the hunt and the tradition of the firstborn. Rebekah and Jacob, bound by a secret prophecy and a shared ambition. One evening the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the encampment. Jacob sat by a small fire, stirring a pot of stew. It was a red lentil stew, rich and savory, seasoned with the herbs he had carefully gathered. The aroma wafted through the air, a smell of home and comfort. Jacob watched the steam rise, his expression unreadable. He was waiting. He knew his brother would return soon, and he knew his brother would be empty. In the distance, a figure appeared on the horizon. It was Esau, stumbling, his quiver empty, his shoulders slumped. He had hunted all day and caught nothing. He was exhausted, parched, and driven by a hunger that clouded his judgment. Jacob stirred the red stew and waited. The heel catcher was ready to make his move. The years drifted by like sand in the wind, and the boys grew into men who were as distinct as the day is from the night. The rivalry that began in the womb had now taken root in their characters, shaping their desires and their destinies. Esau had become a master of the wild, a man who lived by the strength of his arm and the accuracy of his bow. He was a creature of the moment, driven by the thrill of the chase and the satisfaction of his immediate appetites. Jacob, however, was a man of the mind. He dwelt in the tents, observing the rhythms of the household, the management of the flocks, and the weight of the spiritual legacy his father carried. One afternoon, the heat of the day lay heavy upon the camp. The air was still, shimmering with the intensity of the Sunday. Jacob sat near the entrance of his tent, tending to a fire. In a large clay pot, he was simmering a stew of red lentils. The aroma was rich and savory, smelling of onions, garlic, and the deep, earthy scent of the beans. It was a smell that promised comfort and fullness, a stark contrast to the harsh, arid emptiness of the wilderness surrounding them. As Jacob stirred the pot, a shadow fell across him. He looked up to see Esau stumbling into the camp. The great hunter looked like a broken man. His quiver was empty, his bow dragged in the dust, and his face was gaunt with exhaustion. He had been in the field for days, pursuing game that had eluded him. The wilderness, usually his domain, had turned against him, yielding nothing. He was faint, his body trembling from a deep, gnawing hunger that clouded his mind and weakened his resolve. Esau smelled the red stew. The scent hit him with the force of a physical blow. His eyes, wide and desperate, locked onto the pot. He did not see his brother. He saw only the means to end his suffering. "Quick," he gasped, his voice raspy and dry. "Let me have some of that red stew. I am famished." Jacob stopped stirring. He looked at his brother, assessing the situation with a cold, calculating gaze. He saw not just a hungry man, but a man who was ruled by his belly, a man who lived only for the now. Jacob saw an opportunity that he had been waiting for all his life. He knew the value of the birthright, the sacred status of the firstborn that entitled a man to a double portion of the inheritance and, more importantly, the spiritual leadership of the family. To Esau it was a distant title. To Jacob it was everything. "First sell me your birthright," Jacob said calmly, his voice steady amidst his brother's distress. Esau stared at him, incredulous. The concept of a birthright, a promise of future honor and responsibility, meant nothing to him in the face of his immediate physical need. He felt the hollowness in his stomach and the weakness in his knees. The future was a ghost. The hunger was a beast, tearing at his insides. "Look, I am about to die," Esau said, his voice rising in a dramatic plea. "What good is the birthright to me?" It was a statement of profound carelessness. Esau was not truly dying, but his lack of discipline made his discomfort feel like death. He was willing to trade the eternal for the temporary, the sacred for the profane. Jacob did not move to serve the food. He needed more than words. "Swear to me first," Jacob commanded. So Esau swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. In that moment, the transaction was sealed. The unseen crown of the family passed from the elder to the younger, not by the decree of the father, but by the foolishness of the son. Jacob handed Esau some bread in the bowl of red lentil stew. Esau ate and drank, devouring the meal with no thought of what he had just lost. Then he got up and left. The scriptures would later say that Esau despised his birthright. He treated the holy promise of God as something of less value than a single bowl of soup. Jacob, though his methods were manipulative, understood the worth of what he had gained. He had secured the legal right to the blessing, but the path to claiming it would lead him into a web of deeper deception. Time continued its relentless march, and Isaac, the son of the promise, grew old. The vitality that had once allowed him to dig wells in the desert and walk mountains with his father Abraham had faded. His eyes, once sharp and clear, were now covered with a milky film. Blindness had descended upon him, shrinking his world to the things he could touch, hear, and smell. He sat in the darkness of his tent, sensing that the day of his death was approaching. Isaac decided it was time to pass on the blessing. In their tradition, the blessing was more than a wish. It was a prophetic act, a transfer of divine power and destiny that could not be revoked once spoken. Despite the prophecy given to Rebekah years ago, and despite Esau's careless sale of the birthright, Isaac remained firm in his love for his firstborn. He intended to give the blessing of Abraham to Esau. He called for his older son. Esau came to him, smelling of the outdoors. "My son," Isaac said, his voice trembling with age. "Here I am," Esau answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man, and do not know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Isaac's request was born of affection. He wanted to taste the wild game one last time, to share a meal of communion with his favorite son before releasing the weight of the covenant upon him. Esau, eager to receive the blessing he had once scorned, immediately took his weapons and left for the fields. But they were not alone. Rebekah had been listening. She stood in the shadows near the entrance of the tent, her heart racing. She heard Isaac's plan, and panic seized her. She knew the prophecy of the Lord, "The older will serve the younger." She knew that Esau was unfit for the spiritual burden of the covenant. He had married Hittite women who brought grief to their family, showing no regard for the holiness of their lineage. If Isaac blessed Esau, the divine plan would be derailed, and the destiny of her beloved Jacob would be lost. Rebekah was a woman of action. She did not wait for God to intervene, she decided to intervene herself. She waited until the sound of Esau's footsteps faded into the distance. Then she hurried to find Jacob. "My son," she said, her voice urgent and low, "I overheard your father speaking to your brother Esau. He is going to bless him. Now then, listen to me and do exactly what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then you will take it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies." Jacob looked at his mother with wide eyes. The plan was audacious and fraught with danger. It was one thing to bargain with a hungry brother. It was another to deceive a blind patriarch in the name of the Lord. "But my brother Esau is a hairy man while I have smooth skin," Jacob objected. "What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." Jacob feared the consequences of failure, but Rebekah feared the failure of destiny. She looked at her son with a fierce determination. "My son, let the curse fall on me," she declared. "Just do what I say." The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to conspire with the plot unfolding in the tent of Rebekah. Jacob returned from the flocks carrying 2 young goats. His heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of anxiety. He handed the animals to his mother, and she set to work with a terrifying efficiency. Rebekah prepared the goats and cooked the meat, seasoning it with savory herbs to mimic the strong, gamey taste of venison that Isaac loved. She worked quickly, knowing that Esau could return at any moment. The aroma of the cooking meat filled the small space, masking the scent of the deception. But the food was only half the ruse. Rebekah went to the chest where the family treasures were kept and pulled out the finest clothes of Esau, the garments he wore on special occasions. They carried the distinct ingrained scent of the fields, of earth and wood smoke, and the resin of pine. She commanded Jacob to put them on. The robe was too large for him, hanging loosely on his frame, but the smell was convincing. Then came the most desperate part of the disguise. Rebekah took the skins of the goats, still warm and soft, and carefully wrapped them around Jacob's hands and the smooth part of his neck. It was a crude tactic, relying entirely on the failing senses of an old man. Jacob looked at his hands, now covered in animal fur, and felt a wave of revulsion and fear. He was becoming a counterfeit of his brother, hiding his true self beneath layers of lies. "Here," Rebekah whispered, handing him the bowl of steaming food and the fresh bread she had baked. "Go to your father." Jacob walked across the camp. Every step felt heavy. He approached his father's tent and pulled back the flap. The interior was dim, lit only by the embers of a dying fire. Isaac sat on his rugs, his head bowed, waiting. "My father," Jacob said, his voice tight. "Yes," Isaac answered, lifting his sightless eyes. "Who are you, my son?" The question hung in the air. This was the moment of truth. Jacob took a breath, steeling himself. "I am Esau, your firstborn," Jacob lied. "I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may bless me." Isaac frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. Something was wrong. The time had been too short. "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" Isaac asked. Jacob's reply was the most chilling part of the deception. He invoked the name of the Lord to cover his lie. "The Lord your God gave me success," he said. Isaac sat up slowly, his suspicion growing. The voice did not sound like the rough, booming baritone of Esau. It was softer, more modulated. "Come near so I can touch you, my son," Isaac said, reaching out his trembling hands, "to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." Jacob stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. He extended his hands, covered in the goatskins, toward his father. Isaac's aged, weathered fingers brushed against the hair on Jacob's wrists. He felt the roughness, the texture that he associated with his hunter son. He leaned in, confused. "The voice is the voice of Jacob," Isaac murmured, more to himself than to the room, "but the hands are the hands of Esau." The sensory conflict was intense. His ears told him one thing, but his hands told him another. In the end, the frailty of his body betrayed him. He trusted his touch more than his hearing. He did not recognize him. "Are you really my son Esau?" Isaac asked one last time. "I am," Jacob whispered. "Then bring it to me," Isaac said, resigning himself to the evidence of his touch. "I will eat my son's game and bless him." Jacob served him the food, and Isaac ate. He drank the wine Jacob brought. The meal was finished. The ritual was almost complete. "Come here, my son, and kiss me," Isaac said. Jacob leaned in close. As he did, Isaac smelled the clothes he was wearing. The scent of the open fields, of the earth that the Lord had blessed, filled Isaac's nostrils. It was the final confirmation he needed. His heart swelled with love and prophetic power. "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed," Isaac proclaimed. And then he poured out the blessing. It was a river of words promising the dew of heaven and the richness of the earth, an abundance of grain and new wine. He commanded that nations would serve him and peoples would bow down to him. "Be Lord over your brothers," Isaac declared, sealing the destiny of the twins. "May the sons of your mother bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you." Jacob received the words. They settled upon him like a heavy mantle. He had what he wanted. He was now the heir, but he had bought it with a lie. Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, the echo of the blessing still hanging in the air, when the flap of the tent opened again. Esau entered. He was triumphant, his face flushed with the success of the hunt. He had prepared the game with care, eager to please his father and receive his due. He carried the savory dish to Isaac, his voice booming with anticipation. "My father, sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may bless me." Isaac froze. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. The old man lay still, his mind racing, trying to comprehend what he was hearing. If Esau was here, then who had just left? The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The deception became clear, but more than that, the terrifying reality that God's will had been accomplished despite his own intentions washed over him. "Who are you?" Isaac whispered, his voice shaking. "I am your son," Esau answered, confused by his father's reaction. "Your firstborn, Esau." Then Isaac trembled violently. It was not just a shiver of old age. It was a great and exceeding trembling that shook his entire frame. He was shaken to the core of his being. He realized he had been an instrument in a divine play he did not fully understand. He had blessed Jacob, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the blessing was irrevocable. God had ratified the act. "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me?" Isaac cried out, his voice cracking with distress. "I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, the reality of his loss crashed down upon him. He dropped the food he was holding. His knees gave way. He burst out with a loud and bitter cry, a sound of pure anguish that tore through the camp. "Bless me, me too, my father," Esau wailed. But Isaac could not look at him, even if his eyes could see. "Your brother came deceitfully," Isaac said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "and he has taken your blessing." Esau's grief turned to a burning rage. "Isn't he rightly named Jacob?" he spat. "This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he has taken my blessing." He looked at his father with desperate eyes. "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" he pleaded. Isaac answered Esau, "I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Esau wept aloud. The mighty hunter was reduced to a weeping child, begging for scraps of his father's favor. "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." Moved by his son's tears, Isaac offered what he could, but it was a shadow of a blessing, a prophecy of a hard life. "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck." It was a promise of conflict, of a life defined by struggle and eventual rebellion. Esau accepted the words, but in his heart a cold, dark seed was planted. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a murderous resolve. He did not lash out immediately. He held his grudge close, nursing it like a fire. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will take my revenge on my brother Jacob." The intent was clear. As soon as Isaac breathed his last, the family would be torn apart by fratricide. The stolen blessing had brought not peace, but a sword. The brothers were now enemies, and the camp of Isaac had become a house of war. The camp of Isaac was no longer a home. It had become a place of imminent danger. The air was thick with the unspoken threat of violence. Rebekah, whose sharp ears missed nothing, had heard the dark murmurings of her older son. Esau was not merely angry. He was consumed by a cold, calculating wrath. He had vowed that as soon as the days of mourning for their father were complete, he would take the life of his brother. The bond of blood had been severed by the theft of the blessing, and now only a deadly silence stood between the twins. Rebekah moved with the urgency of a mother protecting her offspring from a predator. She called for Jacob, her voice trembling not with fear but with the intensity of her resolve. "My son," she whispered, pulling him into the shadows of her tent. "Your brother Esau consoles himself by planning to end your days. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. When he forgets what you have done to him, I will send word for you to come back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" Jacob looked at his mother. He saw the pain in her eyes. She was sending away the son she loved, the son for whom she had risked her soul, to save him from the son she had birthed first. It was a sacrifice born of necessity. But before he could leave, he needed the dismissal of his father. Isaac, though blind and frail, was still the patriarch. He summoned Jacob. There was no anger in the old man's voice now, only a resigned acceptance of the divine will. He understood that the deception, though painful, had fulfilled a purpose greater than his own preferences. "Do not marry a Canaanite woman," Isaac commanded, his voice regaining a measure of its former strength. "Go at once to Padan Aram, to the house of your mother's father. Take a wife for yourself there, from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother." Then Isaac raised his hands, the hands that had once touched the goatskins, and pronounced a blessing that was free of trickery. "May God Almighty bless you, and make you fruitful, and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham, so that you may take possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, the land God gave to Abraham." With those words, the mantle was officially passed. Jacob was no longer the usurper in the shadows, he was the sent one. But the blessing did not come with an army or a caravan of wealth. He left with only his staff in his hand and the clothes on his back. He walked away from the tents of his father, the only world he had ever known. He walked past the flocks he had tended, past the servants he had commanded, and out into the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the wilderness. As the sun began to set, casting long, lonely shadows across the rocky ground, the reality of his exile settled upon him. He was the bearer of the covenant, the heir to the promises of God, yet he was a fugitive, running for his life, alone under the indifferent sky. The journey was arduous. The landscape shifted from the familiar grazing lands of Beersheba to the rugged limestone hills of the central ridge. Jacob walked until his legs burned and the soles of his feet were bruised. He was moving toward Haran, the land of his ancestors, but every step took him further into isolation. As the sun dipped below the horizon on his first nights, a profound loneliness enveloped him. He was a man who had always lived indoors, surrounded by the noise of the camp and the protection of his mother. Now, the silence of the wild was deafening. The wind howled through the canyons, sounding like the accusations of his brother. He reached a certain place near the city of Luz, as the light failed completely. It was a nondescript patch of earth, strewn with rocks and hard ground. There was no tent to shelter him, no fire to warm him. Exhausted, Jacob took one of the stones from the place and placed it under his head as a pillow. It was a harsh resting place, a symbol of his new rugged reality. He lay down, curling his body against the cold, and closed his eyes, expecting a sleep filled with anxiety. Instead, the heavens opened. In the depths of his slumber, a vision of overwhelming grandeur unfolded. He saw a stairway, a great ladder, resting on the earth, but its top reached high into the heavens. It was a bridge between the dust of his failure and the glory of the divine. And on this stairway, the angels of God were ascending and descending. They were beings of light and power, moving with purposeful grace, connecting the two realms. Above the stairway stood the Lord. The voice of God broke the silence of the dream, resonating with the power of thunder and the comfort of a father. "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring." And then, the words that Jacob needed most, the promise that addressed his deepest fear of abandonment. "I am with you, and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Jacob awoke with a start. The night was still dark, the stars shining with a cold brilliance, but the atmosphere had changed. The rocky ground felt charged with a holy presence. He sat up, his heart pounding, not with the fear of Esau, but with the awe of the Almighty. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it," he whispered into the darkness. He was afraid, but it was a reverent fear. How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, while the dawn was still painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head. He set it up as a pillar, a monument to the encounter. He poured oil on top of it, consecrating the common rock into a holy altar. He renamed the place Bethel, the house of God. There the fugitive made a vow. It was a bargain, true to his nature, but also a step of faith. "If God will be with me, and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God." He turned his face toward the east. He was still a man running from his past, but he was no longer walking alone. Jacob continued his journey, his feet carrying him hundreds of miles to the land of the eastern peoples. The landscape changed, becoming greener as he approached the fertile plains of Paddan Aram. His heart was heavy with the uncertainty of his reception, but the promise at Bethel burned like a small flame within him. One afternoon under the high sun, he saw a well in the open field. 3 flocks of sheep were lying near it, seeking respite from the heat. A large stone covered the mouth of the well, a barrier that required the combined strength of several shepherds to move. Jacob approached the shepherds, seeking news of his kin. "My brothers, where are you from?" he asked. "We are from Haran," they replied. The name sparked a light in Jacob's eyes. It was the city of his uncle. "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" he asked. "Yes, we know him," they answered. "And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." Jacob looked up. Coming across the field, leading her flock with the grace of one who knows the land, was Rachel. The scriptures would later describe her as lovely in form and beautiful. To Jacob, she was more than that. She was the end of his exile. She was the first face of his mother's family he had seen in weeks. As she approached, a surge of emotion and adrenaline flooded Jacob's veins. The weariness of the journey vanished. He looked at the heavy stone covering the well, a stone that the shepherds were waiting for assistance to move. Jacob did not wait. Driven by a desire to serve her and perhaps to impress her, he stepped forward. With a strength that surprised even himself, Jacob grasped the stone and rolled it away from the mouth of the well single-handed. He watered the flock of his uncle Laban, tending to the animals with the care of a skilled shepherd. When the work was done, he turned to Rachel. He could no longer contain the dam of emotions that had built up over his long, lonely trek. He kissed Rachel, a traditional greeting of kin, and then he wept aloud. He cried for the relief of safety, for the memory of his mother, and for the overwhelming providence of God that had guided his steps to this precise moment. He told her who he was, that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. Rachel's eyes widened in recognition and joy. She turned and ran to tell her father. Laban heard the news and hurried to meet him. He embraced Jacob and kissed him, bringing him into his home. "Surely you are my own flesh and blood," Laban declared. For the first time since fleeing Beersheba, Jacob felt the warmth of a home. But as he looked at Rachel, he knew that his stay in Haran would not be merely for refuge. He had found a new purpose. The deceiver who had stolen a blessing was about to learn the cost of love and the price of labor. Jacob stayed with Laban for a month, working alongside the family. He was not a guest who sat idly. He was a man who knew the value of work. Laban, observing Jacob's skill with the flocks, saw an opportunity. He was a shrewd man, calculating and opportunistic, traits that ran deep in their bloodline. "Because you are my relative, should you work for me for nothing?" Laban asked one day. "Tell me what your wages should be." It was a trap disguised as generosity. Laban wanted to bind Jacob to him. Jacob did not ask for gold, silver, or livestock. His heart was fixed on one prize. Laban had 2 daughters. The older was Leah, who had weak eyes, a description that perhaps meant they were gentle or lacked the sparkle of vitality. But Rachel was stunning, possessing a beauty that had captivated Jacob from the moment at the well. "I will work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel," Jacob declared. It was an immense price. The bride price was usually a simple gift, but Jacob offered 7 years of his life, 7 years of sweat and toil under the sun. Laban agreed quickly. "It is better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel. The work was hard. The heat consumed him by day, and the cold by night. But the scripture records one of the most romantic lines in history. But they seemed like only a few days to him, because of his love for her. Every sheep he sheared, every night he guarded the flock, was a step closer to his reward. Finally, the time was completed. Jacob went to Laban and demanded his wife. Laban prepared a great feast. He invited all the men of the place, and the wine flowed freely. The celebration went on into the night. When darkness had fully fallen, masking the faces of the guests, Laban took his daughter Leah. He brought her to the bridal tent. In the heavy veil of the wedding customs and the pitch black of the night, Jacob did not see her face. He welcomed her into his tent. He consummated the union, pouring out 7 years of anticipation and love, believing he was holding his beloved Rachel. But when morning came, the cruel light of dawn revealed the truth. There was Leah. Jacob stared at the woman lying beside him. The shock was total. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. He had been tricked. The man who had used goatskins to deceive his blind father in the dark had now been deceived in the dark by a father switching his daughters. The irony was a bitter potion to swallow. He stormed out to find Laban. "What is this you have done to me?" Jacob cried out, his voice raw with anger. "I served you for Rachel, did I not? Why have you deceived me?" Laban stood calm, unmoved by Jacob's fury. He had his answer ready, a justification based on tradition that sounded remarkably like a rebuke of Jacob's own past. "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one," Laban said smoothly. "Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." Jacob was trapped. He could not abandon Leah, for the marriage was sealed. He could not leave without Rachel, for his heart belonged to her. He had been outmaneuvered by a master manipulator. He swallowed his pride and his anger. He finished the week with Leah, honoring the unwanted marriage, and then Laban gave him Rachel to be his wife. But the cost was another 7 years of service. Jacob had come seeking a wife and found himself bound to 2, entering a servitude that would double in length. The deceiver had been deceived, and the cycle of family conflict that began in Isaac's tent was now sown in his own. The house of Jacob was built on a foundation of rivalry, and the price would be paid in the years of tension to come. The wedding week ended, but the echoes of the deception lingered in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Jacob had married Rachel, the woman who held his heart, but he was also bound to Leah, the woman who held the legal claim of the firstborn. The camp of Jacob became a theater of silent warfare, where affection was the weapon and children were the currency of victory. Jacob made no secret of his preference. His eyes followed Rachel with a tenderness that was painful to witness. He spoke to her with a softness that he never offered to her sister. Leah lived in the shadow of this great love, a wife in name but a widow in spirit. She watched from the entrance of her tent, her weak eyes filled with a quiet, desperate longing. She had hoped that sharing his bed would turn his heart toward her, but the heart of Jacob was a fortress that only Rachel could breach. However, the Lord saw that Leah was unloved. In the ancient justice of the divine, God moved to balance the scales. He opened the womb of the unloved sister, while Rachel remained barren. Leah conceived and bore a son. She held the infant close, looking for a sign of affection from her husband. She named him Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." But the birth brought duty, not passion, from Jacob. She conceived again, bearing a second son. She named him Simeon, declaring, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." A third time she conceived, and a third son was born. Hope, stubborn and resilient, rose in her chest. She named him Levi, saying, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Yet the attachment she craved remained elusive. Jacob was a father to her sons, but a stranger to her soul. When she conceived a 4th time, something shifted in Leah's spirit. She stopped looking to Jacob for validation and looked to the heavens. She gave birth to a son and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." She named him Judah. In that moment she found a peace that transcended her marital sorrow. Rachel watched this parade of life with a growing bitterness. Her tent was silent and empty. The laughter of her sister's children was a constant reminder of her own failure. Envy, green and poisonous, took root in her heart. She saw that she had Jacob's love, but Leah had his legacy. The beautiful shepherdess who had once charmed the traveler at the well was now a woman consumed by jealousy. The tension in the camp finally erupted into a confrontation. Rachel, unable to bear the silence of her womb any longer, confronted Jacob. Her grief made her irrational, her words sharp as flint. "Give me children, or I shall die," she cried out, her voice trembling with the weight of her despair. Jacob's anger kindled against Rachel. He loved her, but he could not be God for her. "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" he demanded. In her desperation, Rachel resorted to the customs of her time. She took her servant Bilhah and gave her to Jacob as a wife, intending to build a family through her. It was a proxy arrangement, a surrender of intimacy to secure a lineage. Jacob accepted, and Bilhah conceived, bearing a son. Rachel named him Dan, saying, "God has vindicated me." Bilhah bore a second son, and Rachel named him Naphtali, declaring, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." Leah, seeing that she had stopped having children and fearing she would lose ground in this contest of mothers, took her own servant, Zilpah, and gave her to Jacob. The rivalry had turned the household into a battleground where maidservants were deployed like soldiers. Zilpah bore a son, whom Leah named Gad, meaning a troop or good fortune. She bore a second son, named Asher, meaning happy. The conflict reached a strange and desperate peak during the wheat harvest. Reuben, Leah's eldest, went out into the fields and found mandrakes, plants believed to have the power to induce fertility and love. He brought them to his mother. Rachel saw them and desired them, believing they might be the key to unlocking her womb. "Give me some of your son's mandrakes," Rachel demanded. Leah's resentment flared. "Was it not enough that you took away my husband?" she snapped. "Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" Rachel, ever the negotiator, offered a trade. She would trade her exclusive right to Jacob's company for the plants. "Very well," she said. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came in from the fields that evening, weary from his labor, Leah went out to meet him. There was no seduction, only a transaction. "You must come in to me," she stated plainly, "for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." Jacob complied, a pawn in the war between his wives. God listened to Leah, and she conceived a fifth son, Issachar, then a sixth, Zebulun. Finally, she bore a daughter, Dinah. But the war was not destined to end in Rachel's defeat. After years of silence, God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and gave birth to a son. The shame of her barrenness was rolled away. She named him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." With the birth of Joseph, the dynamic of the family shifted forever. Jacob looked at the son of his beloved Rachel and felt a stirring in his spirit. The time of his service was over. He was ready to go home. Jacob approached Laban with a new resolve. The birth of Joseph had marked the end of an era. He had served 14 years for his wives, and now he desired to build his own house. "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland," Jacob said to his father-in-law. "Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I have done for you." Laban was alarmed. He was a man who worshipped wealth, and he knew that his prosperity was not due to his own skill but to the blessing of God that rested on Jacob. He had learned by divination that the Lord had blessed him because of Jacob. "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay," Laban pleaded. "Name your wages, and I will pay them." Jacob knew Laban's character. He knew that any promise of gold or silver would be broken or begrudged. So, Jacob proposed a deal that seemed on the surface to be foolish. He asked not for the best of the flock, but for the rejects. "Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat," Jacob said. "They will be my wages, and my honesty will testify for me in the future." In the ancient Near East, sheep were typically white and goats were black or brown. Speckled and spotted animals were rare, genetic oddities. Jacob was asking for the minority, the outcasts of the herd. Laban, seeing a chance to keep the bulk of his wealth while retaining Jacob's service, agreed immediately. But Laban's deceit was swift. That very day, he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, and every one that had any white on it, and every dark-colored lamb. He gave them to his sons and put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, leaving Jacob to tend only the solid-colored flocks. Jacob was left with a flock that had no visible means of producing the wages he had requested. But Jacob was the son of Isaac, and he possessed a knowledge of breeding and a reliance on the divine that Laban underestimated. Jacob took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark. He placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs, so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the animals mated in front of the branches, they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Furthermore, Jacob used a strategy of selective breeding. He placed the branches before the stronger animals, so that the strong would bear speckled young for him. But for the weak animals he did not place the branches. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong to Jacob. Whether by biological insight or divine miracle, the plan succeeded beyond measure. The flocks produced speckled and spotted offspring in vast numbers. Jacob grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks, and female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. The man who had arrived with nothing but a staff was now a wealthy chieftain, and the house of Laban began to look at him with envy. Success breeds jealousy, and Jacob soon felt the cold wind of resentment blowing from Laban's camp. He heard the words that Laban's sons were saying. "Jacob has taken everything that belonged to our father," they grumbled. "He has gained all this wealth at our father's expense." Jacob also noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. The smiles were gone, replaced by suspicious glares. The atmosphere was ripe for violence. It was in this moment of tension that the Lord spoke to Jacob, confirming that the time had come. "Return to the land of your ancestors and to your own people, and I will be with you," the Lord commanded. Jacob knew he could not leave openly. Laban would never allow him to take his daughters and his grandchildren and the vast wealth he had accumulated. He had to act with stealth. He sent word to Rachel and Leah to meet him out in the fields, away from the ears of the servants. There, under the open sky, he laid out his case. He reminded them of his faithful service and their father's constant deception. "You know that I have worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times, Jacob said passionately. "However, God has not allowed him to harm me." He told them of the dream where God revealed that he was the one influencing the flocks and commanded the return to Bethel. Rachel and Leah, usually divided, were united in their grievance against their father. "Do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate?" they asked. "Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children." With the support of his wives, Jacob put his plan into motion. He waited for the season of sheep shearing. It was a time of festivity and hard work, and Laban would be miles away with his men, shearing the flocks. It was the perfect distraction. Jacob put his children and his wives on camels. He drove all his livestock ahead of him, gathering all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram. He did not say goodbye. He did not ask for permission. He fled. But before they left, Rachel performed an act of secret rebellion. She went into her father's tent and stole his household gods, the teraphim. These small idols were not just religious symbols. In their culture, possession of the household gods often signified the right to the family inheritance. It was a final act of defiance against a father who had treated her like a commodity. Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. He fled with all he had, crossing the Euphrates River and heading for the hill country of Gilead. The caravan moved fast, driven by the fear of pursuit. They were leaving the land of servitude, heading toward a promised land that was filled with old enemies and new dangers. The caravan of Jacob moved with the desperate speed of those who know they are being hunted. They pushed across the Euphrates River and ascended toward the hill country of Gilead. Jacob looked over his shoulder constantly, his eyes scanning the horizon for the dust cloud that would signal the arrival of his father-in-law. He knew Laban well. The man was possessive and proud, and he would not let his daughters and his wealth vanish without a chase. It took 3 days for the news of the flight to reach Laban. When he heard that Jacob had fled and that his household gods were missing, his fury was like a wildfire. He gathered his kinsmen, a force of strong men armed for confrontation, and set out in hot pursuit. They rode hard, covering the distance that Jacob's slow-moving flocks had taken 10 days to traverse, in just 7 days. Laban overtook Jacob in the rocky heights of Gilead. The sun was setting, casting long, jagged shadows across the camp. The air was thick with tension. Laban intended to do harm. He saw Jacob not as a son-in-law, but as a thief who had plundered his house. However, the God of Abraham stood as a shield between the anger of Laban and the vulnerability of Jacob. In a dream that night, God came to Laban the Aramean. The divine voice was clear and commanding, leaving no room for interpretation. "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." It was a warning to restrain his hand and his tongue. When morning broke, Laban rode into Jacob's camp, his face set like stone, but his sword remained sheathed. He confronted Jacob, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "What have you done?" Laban demanded. "You have deceived me and carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why did you not tell me, so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps?" Laban painted himself as the benevolent patriarch, ignored the years of manipulation. He continued his accusation. "You did not even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father spoke to me and warned me against it. Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household. But why did you steal my gods?" The accusation of theft stunned Jacob. He knew nothing of Rachel's secret rebellion. To him, the claim was an insult to his honor. He stood tall, his indignation rising. "I was afraid," Jacob admitted frankly. "I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But as for your gods, see for yourself. If you find anyone who has them, he shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it." Jacob rashly pronounced a death sentence on the thief, not knowing he was endangering the life of his beloved Rachel. Laban began the search. He tore through Jacob's tent, throwing aside rugs and inspecting chests. He found nothing. He moved to Leah's tent, then to the tents of the two maidservants. The tension mounted with every overturned basket. Finally, he came to Rachel's tent. Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle. She was sitting on them. Her heart raced as her father entered, his eyes dark with suspicion. He rummaged through the tent, his hands brushing close to where she, Saturday. Rachel looked up at her father, her face pale but composed. She used her condition as a shield. "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot stand up in your presence," she said softly, "for the manner of women is upon me." Laban, bound by the customs of purity and perhaps a flicker of fatherly respect, did not force her to rise. He searched the rest of the tent, but found nothing. The gods remained hidden beneath the one he had sold. When Laban came out empty-handed, Jacob's restraint broke. 20 years of suppressed frustration poured out of him in a torrent of words. He confronted Laban, listing every hardship he had endured. "What is my crime?" Jacob shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "What sin have I committed that you hunt me down? You have searched through all my goods, and what have you found? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us." He recounted the freezing nights and the scorching days, the animals he had replaced from his own pocket, and the 10 times Laban had changed his wages. "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed," Jacob declared. "But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." Laban stood silent, his accusations crumbling before the truth of Jacob's service and the divine protection that clearly rested upon him. The pursuit had ended not in violence, but in a stalemate dictated by God. The confrontation at Gilead ended with a truce, not of friendship but of necessity. Laban, realizing he could not overcome the divine hedge around Jacob, proposed a covenant. "Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between us," Laban said. Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He commanded his kinsmen to gather stones, and they made a heap. They ate together by the heap, a meal that signified the end of hostilities. Laban called the place Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. Both names meant the heap of witness. "May the Lord watch between you and me when we are away from each other," Laban declared. "If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me." It was a boundary line drawn in the sand. Laban would not cross it to harm Jacob, and Jacob would not cross it to return to Laban. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. Jacob watched him go, the dust settling on the path to Haran. The chapter of his life in the east was closed. Jacob continued on his way, and the angels of God met him. It was a brief but powerful encounter, a reminder that the earthly army of Laban was gone, but a heavenly army remained. Jacob named the place Mahanaim, meaning 2 camps, signifying his own company and the company of God. But as he turned his face toward the south, a shadow darker than Laban fell over his heart. He was approaching the land of Seir, the territory of Edom, the territory of Esau. The memory of his brother's murderous vow had not faded with time. Jacob sent messengers ahead, hoping to gauge Esau's temper. He instructed them to speak with extreme humility. "Say to my lord Esau, your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my lord, that I may find favor in your eyes." The messengers returned quickly, and their report struck terror into Jacob's soul. "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." 400 men. That was not a welcoming party, it was a battalion. Esau was coming with a small army. Jacob's mind raced with images of destruction. He saw his wives and children falling by the sword, the retribution for a bowl of stew and a stolen blessing. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. It was a strategy born of despair, a calculation of acceptable loss. Then Jacob turned to the only weapon he had left. He prayed. It was not the bargainer's prayer he had made at Bethel 20 years ago. It was the prayer of a man who knew he was at the end of his rope. "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper,'" Jacob cried out. "I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children." He spent the day preparing a massive gift for Esau. He selected hundreds of goats, sheep, camels, cows, and donkeys. He sent them ahead in waves, instructing his servants to tell Esau that they were a gift from his servant Jacob. He hoped to pacify his brother's anger before they stood face to face. The sun set, and the dread of the coming dawn weighed heavy on the camp. Jacob was a man squeezed between a past he had fled and a future that wanted to destroy him. Night fell over the valley of the Jabbok. The sound of the river rushing over stones was the only noise in the darkness. Jacob was restless. He could not sleep. He got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He sent them across the stream, along with all his possessions. He stripped himself of everything. He sent away his wealth, his family, his defenses. He needed to be empty. He needed to be alone. So Jacob was left alone, standing on the dark bank of the river. Suddenly a figure emerged from the shadows. A man grabbed him. There were no words, no explanations. The stranger launched into a physical grapple. Jacob, his adrenaline surging, fought back. They locked arms, chest to chest, muscle straining against muscle. They wrestled in the dust and the mud. It was a primal struggle. At first, Jacob might have thought it was an assassin sent by Esau, or perhaps a bandit of the night. But as the hours wore on, as the sweat poured down his face and his breath came in ragged gasps, he realized this was no ordinary mortal. The stranger moved with a power and a density that felt like the weight of the earth itself. They wrestled until the breaking of the day. The stranger did not overpower Jacob, and Jacob refused to yield. It was a stalemate of wills. The supplanter, who had spent his life wrestling with men, with Esau for the birthright, with Isaac for the blessing, with Laban for the flocks, was now wrestling with the divine. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. It was a mere touch, but it carried the force of a hammer. Jacob's hip was wrenched out of its socket. The pain was blinding, a sharp agony that shot through his entire body. His leg was useless. He could no longer fight. He could only cling. The man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob, broken and crippled, held on with a desperate strength. He realized he was holding on to the source of all life. He could not let go without a resolution. The fear of Esau had vanished, replaced by a desperate need for divine favor. "I will not let you go unless you bless me," Jacob gasped, his voice thick with pain and determination. The man asked him, "What is your name?" It was the question that pierced his soul. 20 years ago, his father had asked him who he was, and he had lied. He had said, "I am Esau." Now, before God, he had to confess his true nature. "Jacob," he whispered. the deceiver, the heel catcher." Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and have overcome." Israel, he struggles with God. The identity of the trickster was stripped away, replaced by the identity of the fighter, the one who prevails not by deceit, but by holding on to God in the midst of pain. Jacob asked, "Please tell me your name." But the man replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. The sun rose above the mountains of Peniel. The stranger was gone. Jacob stood alone by the river, the golden light illuminating the dust on his clothes and the sweat on his brow. He was limping. Every step was a reminder of the night, a testament to the encounter. He named the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." He crossed the river to rejoin his family. He walked with a halted step, leaning on his staff. He was physically weaker than he had ever been, yet spiritually, he was finally ready to face his brother, the man who had fled Canaan as Jacob returned as Israel. The sun rose above the ridge of Peniel, casting a golden light over the valley where the struggle had taken place. Jacob stood alone by the riverbank, his breath misting in the cool morning air. He was not the same man who had crossed the ford the night before. He had entered the darkness as Jacob, the deceiver who grasped at heels to get ahead. He emerged in the light as Israel, the one who struggles with God and prevails. He took a step toward the camp where his family waited, and a sharp pain shot through his hip. He stumbled, catching himself on his staff. The socket of his hip had been wrenched, a physical reminder of this spiritual encounter. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his days. It was a mark of weakness, yet it was also a mark of victory. It signified that he could no longer stand in his own strength. He had to lean on the power of the divine. He crossed the shallow water back to his wives and children. They looked at him with wide eyes. His clothes were covered in dust, his hair was disheveled, and he moved with a strange, halting gait. But there was a new fire in his eyes, a calm authority that they had not seen before. He did not speak of the details of the night, for some encounters are too holy for words. He simply gave the order to move. "Lift up your eyes," Israel said, his voice steady. "My brother comes." In the distance, a cloud of dust signaled the approach of Esau and his 400 men. The moment of reckoning had arrived. But Israel did not hide behind his wealth or his servants, as he had planned the day before. A shift had occurred in his heart. He arranged his family with care. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear to protect them. But he himself went on ahead of them all. He walked to the front of the line, his staff clicking against the stones, his limp visible to everyone. He was done hiding. He was done manipulating from the shadows. He would face his brother as a man who had faced God. As he approached the advancing army, he bowed to the ground 7 times. It was not the bow of a coward, but the bow of a brother showing honor, a deliberate act of humility to bridge the gap of 20 years of silence. He lowered himself to the earth, rising and limping forward, then bowing again, until he was close enough to see the expression on Esau's face. Esau rode at the head of his company, a man of war in the wilderness. He saw the figure approaching him, bowing low in the dust. He saw the limp. He saw the humility. The anger that he had nursed for 2 decades, the cold rage that had promised death, suddenly collided with the reality of his own flesh and blood standing before him, broken and humble. The memory of the stolen blessing faded in the light of the reunion. Esau did not draw his sword. He did not signal his men to attack. Instead, he slid from his mount and ran. He ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him. The great hunter, the man of the sword, wept. Jacob, held in the strong grip of the brother he had feared, wept with him. The sound of their sobbing echoed in the valley, silencing the 400 men who watched in astonishment. It was a moment of grace that defied all logic. When they finally pulled apart, Esau looked at the women and children. "Who are these with you?" he asked, wiping his eyes. "They are the children God has graciously given your servant," Jacob replied. Then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. It was a parade of the blessing that Isaac had prophesied, the multiplication of the family under the hand of God. Esau then asked about the droves of livestock he had met along the way. "What do you mean by all these droves I met?" he asked. "To find favor in your eyes, my lord," Jacob answered. But Esau shook his head. "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob insisted, his heart overflowing with relief. "No, please," he urged. "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." Jacob realized that the grace he saw in Esau's face was a reflection of the grace he had found at Peniel. He compelled him, and finally Esau accepted. The brothers parted in peace. Esau returned to Seir, while Jacob moved to Succoth, and then to the city of Shechem in the land of Canaan, where he bought a plot of ground and pitched his tent. He built an altar there and called it El Elohe Israel, declaring that God was truly the God of Israel. The peace of Shechem was a fragile covering over a deep cultural divide. Jacob had settled near a Canaanite city, hoping to live in quiet proximity to the people of the land. But the walls of his tent could not keep the world out forever. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, was young and curious. She went out to visit the women of the land, stepping beyond the safety of her father's camp. It was a simple act of exploration, but it led to disaster. Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her. He was a man used to taking what he desired. He took her and treated her shamefully, crossing a line that shattered her innocence. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her after the incident. He went to his father Hamor and demanded, "Get me this girl as my wife." Jacob heard what had happened to his daughter. His heart was filled with grief and shame, but he kept silent until his sons returned from the fields. When the sons of Jacob came in and heard the news, they were filled with grief and fury. This was not just a violation of their sister. It was an insult to the house of Israel. Such a thing should not be done. Hamor and Shechem came to the gate of Jacob's camp to propose a union. They offered a dowry and suggested that the two peoples intermarry and trade, becoming one society. It was a political solution to a moral outrage. But the sons of Jacob replied with deceit. Simeon and Levi, Dinah's full brothers, spoke up. They claimed they could not give their sister to men who were uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace. They proposed a condition. The men of Shechem must all be circumcised, just as they were. Only then would they agree to the marriage alliance. Hamor and Shechem, blinded by desire and the prospect of wealth, agreed. They convinced the men of their city to undergo the procedure. 3 days later, while all the men of Shechem were in pain and unable to defend themselves, Simeon and Levi took their weapons. They entered the city boldly, without resistance. They attacked the men, overpowering them one by one. They took the lives of Hamor and his son Shechem and took Dinah out of Shechem's house. The other sons of Jacob joined in the plunder, seizing flocks, herds, and wealth, carrying off women and children as captives. It was a brutal act of vengeance that far exceeded the original crime. Jacob was horrified. He confronted Simeon and Levi, his voice trembling with fear for the future. "You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But the brothers answered with cold defiance. Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? The question hung in the air unanswered. The family of Israel had defended its honor, but at the cost of its innocence. Their hands were now stained with blood. The massacre at Shechem made the land unsafe. God spoke to Jacob, commanding him to move, go up to Bethel, and settle there, and build an altar there to God. Jacob knew that to meet God again, his household needed to be clean. He commanded his family to get rid of the foreign gods they had collected, including the plunder from Shechem and perhaps the idols Rachel still hid. They purified themselves and changed their clothes. They buried the idols under a great oak tree, leaving their pagan past in the dust. As they traveled, a terror from God fell on the surrounding towns, so that no one pursued them. They arrived at Bethel, the place of the ladder and the promise. Jacob built an altar, reaffirming his covenant. But the journey from Bethel brought a season of profound loss. As they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel went into labor. It was a difficult, agonizing birth. The midwife tried to comfort her, saying, "Do not fear, for you have another son." But Rachel's strength was fading. As her soul was departing, for she was dying, she looked at the child who had cost her life. She named him Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. It was a name of grief, a stamp of tragedy upon the infant. Jacob, his heart breaking as he held his dying wife, refused to let the boy carry such a heavy burden. He changed the name. He called him Benjamin, son of my right hand. Rachel died and was buried on the way to Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb, a monument to the woman he had loved and served 14 years to win. The love story that had defined his life ended by a dusty roadside. The sorrow continued. Isaac, the old patriarch, finally breathed his last. He died at a ripe old age and was gathered to his people. Esau and Jacob, the twin brothers, stood side by side once more to bury their father. The generation of the promise had passed, and now Jacob stood alone as the patriarch, surrounded by sons who were wild and dangerous. Jacob settled in the land of Canaan, but his household was far from peaceful. The rivalry that had plagued his wives now lived on in his sons. Jacob, repeating the mistake of his parents, showed open favoritism. He loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, for he was the son of his old age and the firstborn of his beloved Rachel. To mark this favor, Jacob made an ornate robe for Joseph, a coat of many colors that signaled status and royalty. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph, young and perhaps naive, fueled this fire by sharing his dreams. He told them of sheaves of wheat bowing down to his sheaf, and of the sun, moon, and stars bowing to him. The brothers looked at him with dark eyes. "Do you intend to reign over us?" they sneered. The hatred boiled over when Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers near Dothan. Seeing him approach from a distance, the brothers plotted his death. "Here comes that dreamer," they said. "Come now, let us dispose of him and throw him into one of these cisterns." Reuben, the oldest, tried to save him, suggesting they throw him into the pit alive, planning to rescue him later. But when Joseph arrived, they stripped him of his beautiful robe and threw him into the empty well. While they sat down to eat, a caravan of Ishmaelites appeared on the horizon, heading for Egypt. Judah saw a chance to get rid of the dreamer without having his blood directly on their hands. "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites," Judah proposed. They pulled Joseph up and sold him for 20 shekels of silver. The deal was done. The son of the promise was sold like a common slave. To cover their crime, they took the ornate robe and sacrificed a goat. They dipped the robe in the blood, soaking the bright colors in deep crimson. They brought it back to their father with a cruel lie. "We found this," they said. "Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." Jacob recognized it instantly. "It is my son's robe," he cried, his voice shattering with grief. "Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been attacked by a wild beast." Jacob tore his clothes and put on sackcloth. He mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, weeping. "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." The patriarch who had deceived his father with the skins of a goat was now deceived by the blood of a goat. He sat in the dust, believing his beloved son was dead, unaware that the hand of God was moving even in this tragedy, preparing a path that would eventually lead them all down to Egypt. The story of Israel was not ending. It was merely descending into the darkness before a new dawn. The story of Jacob serves as a powerful testament to the idea that human imperfection does not disqualify a person from a great destiny. We see a character who is deeply flawed, driven by ambition and a willingness to deceive, yet he remains central to a divine plan. This narrative invites us to reflect on our own lives, reminding us that our past mistakes and personal shortcomings are not the end of our story. It encourages the listener to understand that growth often comes from the very struggles we try to avoid, and that a legacy is built not on a foundation of perfection, but on the willingness to wrestle with our own nature and evolve. Furthermore, the journey of Jacob teaches us the vital importance of reconciliation and the courage to face our past. For 20 years, fear dictated his steps, but true freedom only came when he humbled himself before the brother he had wronged and the God he needed. The limp he carried away from the river was a symbol of a new strength found in surrender. This offers a timeless piece of advice for us today. Do not run from your conflicts or your history, for it is in facing them with humility that we find true peace and become the people we were meant to be. If you enjoyed this story, please support the channel by clicking the like button and subscribing for more biblical journeys. I would love to read your thoughts and reflections in the comments section below. Remember that no shadow is deep enough to hide you from the light. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.